Elon Musk is worth $200 billion. That's what the headlines say. That's what the Forbes list says. That's the number that makes people angry on social media, that gets cited in debates about inequality, that politicians reference when proposing wealth taxes. There's just one problem. Elon Musk doesn't have $200 billion. He's never had $200 billion. He will never have $200 billion. The number is, in a very real sense, fictional. If Musk tried to convert his wealth into actual money, most of it would evaporate. The act of selling would destroy the value he's supposedly selling. This isn't a defense of billionaires, it's an explanation of how billionaire wealth actually works. Because if you don't understand the mechanics, you can't understand why taxing it is so complicated, why inequality statistics are misleading, and why the billionaire economy operates by completely different rules than yours. Today, I'm going to show you the illusion. How billionaire wealth is created, how it's maintained, how billionaires actually live, and why the solutions you've heard proposed either won't work or would have consequences nobody's discussing. This is the wealth illusion explained. 1. What the number actually means. Let's start with basics. What does it mean when we say someone is worth $200 billion? It doesn't mean they have $200 billion in a bank account. Nobody has that. The entire currency in circulation in the United States is only about $2.3 trillion. One person having $200 billion in cash would be nearly 10% of all physical money. Billionaire net worth is calculated by adding up assets and subtracting liabilities. For most billionaires, the overwhelming majority of assets are shares in companies they founded. Musk's wealth is almost entirely Tesla and SpaceX stock. Bezos's wealth was almost entirely Amazon stock. Zuckerberg's wealth is almost entirely Meta stock. The value of this stock is determined by the market price. Take the number of shares, multiply by current price, and that's the paper wealth. But market price represents what the last trade happened at. It doesn't represent what you could get for all the shares. In fact, for large holdings, it represents something almost meaningless. 2. The liquidity illusion. Here's the central illusion. Paper wealth assumes you can convert shares to cash at current prices. You can't. When someone with a small holding sells stock, their trade doesn't move the market. The price before and after is essentially the same. When someone with a massive holding sells, the act of selling moves the market. Supply floods in, price drops. The more you sell, the more you destroy the value of what you're selling. Musk owns roughly 13% of Tesla. If he tried to sell all of it, what would happen? First, the market would know he's selling. This would be interpreted as a signal that he thinks the stock is overvalued or that something is wrong. Other investors would sell too. The price would crash before he sold a single share. Second, the actual selling would overwhelm demand. There aren't enough buyers for that volume of stock at current prices. He'd have to accept lower and lower prices for each tranche. Third, his exit would fundamentally change the company. Tesla without Musk is a different investment thesis. The stock might never recover to current levels. Estimates vary, but Musk probably couldn't extract more than 20–30% of his paper wealth as actual cash. The rest exists only as a number on a screen. This is true for all concentrated billionaire holdings. The paper wealth is theoretical. The liquid wealth is a fraction of the headline number. 3. How billionaires actually live. If billionaires can't access their paper wealth, how do they afford private jets and mega yachts and $100 million mansions? The answer is elegant and infuriating. They borrow. A billionaire with $10 billion in stock can walk into any bank and get a loan for essentially any amount at extremely low interest rates. The stock serves as collateral. This is called a securities-backed loan, or a margin loan at the upper end of the wealth spectrum. The billionaire gets cash to spend. They don't sell any stock. They don't trigger any taxable event. They pay interest on the loan, but interest rates for billionaires are barely above inflation. The effective cost is near zero. As long as the stock price keeps rising, the billionaire never has to repay the principal. They can just take out larger loans as their collateral grows. When they die, the assets get a stepped-up basis. This means the heirs inherit the stock at its current value. All the accumulated gains during the billionaire's life disappear for tax purposes. No one ever pays capital gains tax on those gains. The heirs can then sell the stock, pay off the loans, and pocket the difference tax-free. This is how billionaires live lavishly while claiming tiny incomes. This is how they pass wealth to the next generation while avoiding taxes. It's all legal. It's not even controversial among tax lawyers. It's just how the system works. 4. The tax magic. Let's talk about those tiny incomes. In 2007, Jeff Bezos paid zero federal income tax. In 2011, zero again. This while his wealth increased by billions. How is this possible? Bezos didn't sell his Amazon stock, so he had no capital gains. His salary from Amazon was modest. His only income, for tax purposes, was small. ProPublica obtained IRS data showing that the 25 richest Americans paid a true tax rate of about 3.4% from 2014 to 2018. This measures taxes paid against wealth growth, which isn't how taxes officially work, but captures the economic reality. The wealthy pay low taxes not through illegal evasion, but through legal avoidance. The tax code taxes income, not wealth. If you don't create taxable income, you don't pay taxes. The borrow buy die strategy creates no income. Borrow. Take loans against assets. Loan proceeds aren't income. Buy. Purchase whatever you want with borrowed money. Die. Leave assets to heirs with stepped up basis. At no point does taxable income appear. The billions in gains simply vanish from the tax system. 5. Why wealth taxes fail. The obvious solution seems to be taxing wealth instead of income. If billionaires avoid income tax by not having income, tax their assets directly. Several countries have tried this. Most abandoned it. The problems are severe. The valuation problem. Public stock is easy to value. What about private companies? Musk's SpaceX isn't publicly traded. How much is it worth? Reasonable estimates vary by tens of billions. What about art? Real estate in illiquid markets? Complex financial instruments? Private equity stakes? These are judgment calls, and every billionaire would hire armies of lawyers to argue for the lowest possible valuation. The IRS would need to become an army of appraisers, fighting constant litigation over valuations. The administrative cost would be enormous. The liquidity problem. Even if you value assets accurately, the taxpayer needs cash to pay the tax, but we've established that paper wealth isn't liquid. Forcing billionaires to sell stock annually to pay wealth taxes would create constant downward pressure on stock prices. It would hurt everyone with retirement savings in those stocks. It would trigger the same value destruction we discussed earlier. Do you tax someone on $10 billion and then watch the forced sale reduce their wealth to $3 billion? Do you refund the difference? The flight problem. Wealth is mobile. The person is mobile. A billionaire facing a serious wealth tax can renounce citizenship and move to a country without one. Eduardo Saverin, Facebook co-founder, renounced US citizenship before the IPO and moved to Singapore. He saved an estimated $700 million in taxes. Not every billionaire would leave, but enough would that revenues would disappoint, and the most mobile wealth, the financial assets easiest to move, would flee first. The constitutional problem. In the United States, a wealth tax may be unconstitutional. The Constitution restricts direct taxes and may require that they be apportioned among states by population. Legal scholars disagree, but any wealth tax would face immediate court challenges. This doesn't mean wealth should go untaxed. It means the simple, just tax the billionaire solution is much more complicated than it sounds. 6. The stock illusion. Let's look more carefully at what stock wealth actually represents. When Tesla's stock price rises from $200 to $400, Musk's paper wealth doubles. Did anything real change? Maybe. If the price increase reflects genuine improvement in Tesla's business, improved sales, better margins, successful new products, then yes, real value was created. But stock prices also move on sentiment, on narrative, on speculation. Tesla's stock has swung dramatically based on tweets, on Musk's behavior, on factors unrelated to the underlying business. During the meme stock era, companies with no profits and questionable futures saw stock prices multiply. Were those shareholders really wealthier? Or were they holding lottery tickets that happened to be temporarily valued highly? Stock wealth is a claim on future profits, but future profits are uncertain. The wealth depends on predictions about what will happen years or decades from now. When we say Musk is worth $200 billion, we're really saying that if future Tesla earnings match market expectations, and if Musk could somehow sell without disrupting the market, and if no unforeseen events occur, then theoretically his holdings would be worth that much. That's a lot of ifs. 7. The comparison problem. Here's why this matters for inequality discussions. When we compare billionaire wealth to median household wealth, we're comparing fundamentally different things. Median household wealth is mostly home equity and retirement savings. These are relatively liquid. You can sell your house, you can withdraw from your 401k with penalties. Billionaire wealth is mostly illiquid stock in companies they control. They can't easily sell. The number is more theoretical than real. This doesn't mean inequality isn't real. It obviously is. Billionaires live vastly better than ordinary people. They have power, ordinary people don't. But the specific numbers cited, the Musk has more wealth than the bottom 50% combined, are comparing apples to aircraft carriers. The measurement tools weren't designed for this comparison. If Musk's stock dropped 80% tomorrow, his paper wealth would crash. Would inequality have been reduced? Not in any meaningful sense. He'd still be rich. The bottom 50% would be exactly the same. The paper wealth numbers create the impression of a giant pot of money that could be redistributed. The pot is much smaller than it appears, and redistributing it would destroy most of it in the process. 8. The business reason. Why do founders hold so much stock in their companies? Why not diversify? The cynical answer, greed. They want to maximize wealth. The practical answer, control. Musk owns Tesla stock because owning Tesla stock means controlling Tesla. If he diversified into index funds, he'd be richer in risk-adjusted terms, but would have no say in how Tesla is run. For founders, the company is the mission. Zuckerberg wants to control Meta's direction. Bezos wanted to control Amazon's strategy. The stock isn't just wealth, it's power over something they built. Public markets also reward founder control. Investors often pay premiums for companies where founders remain involved. The stock is worth more precisely because the founder hasn't sold. If Musk sold half his Tesla stake, what message would that send? That he's cashing out, that he doesn't believe in the company's future. The stock would crater. Concentrated holdings aren't irrational. They're how you maintain control of what you've built. The paper wealth is a side effect, not the goal. 9. When paper becomes real. Paper wealth does become real sometimes. Here's when. Small sales. Billionaires can sell small percentages of holdings without major price impact. Musk sold about $40 billion of Tesla stock over 2021 to 2022. The stock dropped during this period, but not entirely because of his sales. Still, $40 billion is very different from $200 billion. He could extract some wealth, not all of it. Acquisition. When a company is acquired, paper wealth becomes real. Shareholders receive cash or stock in the acquiring company. But for founder-controlled companies, acquisitions are rare. The founder doesn't want to sell control. The paper wealth remains paper. IPOs and secondary sales. When private companies go public, founders can sell shares. This is how many tech founders extracted wealth. But again, they can only sell a portion without tanking the stock. Lending. As discussed, borrowing against stock creates liquid cash without selling. This is real money billionaires can spend, but it's borrowed money, not extracted wealth. Eventually it must be repaid or the heirs deal with it. Paper wealth can become partially real. It can support a billionaire lifestyle through leverage, but the headline number remains mostly fictional. 10. What would actually work? If traditional wealth taxes fail, how could billionaire wealth actually be taxed? Mark-to-market taxation. Tax unrealized capital gains annually as if they were income. If your stock rises by $10 billion, you owe taxes on $10 billion, whether you sold or not. This solves the step up at death problem. Gains are taxed as they accrue. Problems remain. Illiquid assets are hard to value. Liquidity issues persist, but it's more workable than a separate wealth tax. Eliminate stepped up basis. The simplest reform. Stop erasing capital gains at death. If someone dies with $100 billion in unrealized gains, their estate pays capital gains tax. This closes the borrow buy die loophole. Eventually the gains would be taxed. Heirs would inherit less. This could actually pass constitutional muster and is administratively simpler than new wealth taxes. Tax the borrowing strategy. Treat loans against appreciated assets above a certain threshold as taxable events. If you borrow against stock to fund your lifestyle, you've effectively realized the gain. This directly targets the strategy billionaires use to avoid taxes. Reform corporate taxation. Much billionaire wealth comes from corporate profits being retained and reflected in stock prices. Higher corporate taxes would indirectly tax this wealth. Closing loopholes that allow profit shifting to tax havens would help too. None of these are politically easy. All face opposition from the wealthy and their political allies. But they're more feasible than the simple wealth tax that politicians propose and then abandon when confronted with implementation realities. 11. The bigger picture. Here's the uncomfortable truth that both sides of the political debate avoid. To the left, billionaire wealth is not a pot of money waiting to be redistributed. It's mostly illiquid claims on company value. Taxing it is genuinely complicated. Just take their money isn't a policy, it's a slogan. To the right, the current system allows the wealthy to avoid taxation almost entirely while the middle class pays. This is indefensible. Unrealized gains aren't real, is convenient when you can borrow against them indefinitely. Both sides use billionaires as symbols. The left uses them as villains whose wealth could solve all problems. The right uses them as job creators who must be protected from any taxation. Neither narrative is accurate. Billionaire wealth is real enough to buy influence, to distort politics, to purchase luxury beyond imagining. It's also not as liquid or taxable as headlines suggest. We need a tax system that acknowledges both realities. One that closes loopholes while recognizing valuation and liquidity constraints. One that ensures the wealthy pay something while not creating administrative nightmares. This requires nuance. Nuance doesn't fit on a protest sign or in a tweet. Conclusion. The numbers game. The next time you see a headline about billionaire wealth, remember what you're actually reading. You're reading a number created by multiplying shares by market price. A number that assumes those shares could be sold at that price. They can't. You're reading a number that ignores taxes, transaction costs, and market impact. That treats theoretical value as equivalent to spendable cash. You're reading a number that serves journalistic purposes, it's dramatic, it drives engagement, but doesn't describe economic reality. Elon Musk is extraordinarily rich. He has more money, more resources, more power than you will ever have. That's true, regardless of whether his paper wealth is $200 billion or $50 billion. But the specific number is a fiction, a useful fiction for Forbes lists and political debates, not a description of anything real. Understanding this doesn't excuse inequality. It doesn't mean we shouldn't tax the wealthy more effectively. It doesn't make the system fair. It just means we should understand what we're actually talking about. Paper wealth and real wealth are different things. Policy that treats them as identical will fail. Billionaires are rich. They're not as rich as the numbers say. They don't pay their fair share of taxes. Fixing that is harder than it sounds. All of these things are true simultaneously. If this made you think about wealth differently, hit that subscribe button. Because the world is more complicated than the headlines suggest, and understanding complexity is how you stop being manipulated by simple stories. See you in the comments, and remember, when someone tells you about billionaire wealth, ask what they're actually measuring. The answer is usually something imaginary.